Well, good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to call this meeting of the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality to order. Today is Wednesday, December 14th, 2022. The time is 9:30 a.m. With us today are Commissioners Emily Lindley and Bobby Janecka, as well as our General Counsel, Mary Smith, and I am John Neerman. For those who are making presentations, I'll ask you to please wait to begin your presentation until either our General Counsel or I have asked you to begin speaking. On items where argument or discussion is allowed, we will inform speakers of their time limits. Registration has now closed, but if you would like to address the Commission on a particular item, please email agenda@tceq.texas.gov with your name, your affiliation, and the item you'd like to speak to, and we will do our best to accommodate that request. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge the departure of three remarkable leaders, beginning with Warren Samuelson. Warren has served the state with distinction for 51 years. 51 years. Warren started with the Texas Water Rights Commission in 1969, if you can believe that. He's been with the Dam Safety Program and its various iterations for 44 years. He is a nationally recognized expert in the field of dam safety, and he has led TCEQ's dam safety program and has really been an outstanding leader of that program for decades. I will note that he rebuilt that program and sustained it in a climate of scarce resources. Warren, I don't think we can ever adequately thank you for all of the contributions you've made to the people of the state of Texas, but you certainly have our gratitude. And don't go anywhere, because I've got something else for you in just a minute. L'Oreal Stepney. L'Oreal is departing the agency for an appointment to the Texas Water Development Board. We're very proud of you, L'Oreal. Lori began her career 30 years ago. She has 3 decades with the agency. She started as an NSR permit writer, and she helped implement the Title V program. So a lot of you know L'Oreal as a water person, as a rainmaker, but she was an airhead before she was a rainmaker. She has led the wastewater permitting section, the water quality division, and the Office of Water. Her accomplishments are too numerous to list, but I do want to mention her many contributions to the Mickey Leland Environmental Internship Program, where she has served as a board member and as a true advocate. Finally, for the last few years, as Deputy Executive Director, L'Oreal has been a trusted advisor and an invaluable leader in the executive suite. L'Oreal, the Water Development Board, is very fortunate to have you. So congratulations again, and thank you for the great skill, wisdom, and dedication you brought in pursuit of our agency's mission. And that brings us to the short timer, Toby Baker. Toby has only served for a decade, but he has served us also with distinction, both as a commissioner and as the executive director. One of just what endears Toby to so many people at this agency is that he's been a strong advocate for TCEQ's staff, and at the same time, he's pushed the agency to continuously improve. Toby authored and implemented a set of enforcement initiatives to enhance compliance. These include, among other initiatives, spearheading revisions to TCEQ's penalty policy, revising the compliance history rules, and refocusing investigation resources to address operations that present the greatest complexity or the greatest risk. On the permitting side, Toby has engaged staff to improve permitting timelines and compress those timelines. He's fostered an agency culture both of service to our fellow Texans and of community within the agency. And Toby refers to that community as our TCEQ family. So Toby, on behalf of our TCEQ family, Thank you, and we wish you all the best in your next assignment. Commissioner Lindley, is there anything you would like to add?
Sure. Gosh, I was prepared to talk about Warren. I was not prepared to talk about L'Oreal and Toby yet, but I'll say something real brief on all three of them. You know, one observation I have is that between the three of you leaving, now two of you are not leaving state service, but with all of you leaving the agency, just today alone, we're losing almost 100 years of institutional knowledge and service to this agency, which is pretty significant. Warren being 51 of those. So, he carried the weight on that one. But, you know, one thing I can say about all three of you is that you're all just kind people, and that goes a long way, right? And I've always appreciated that about all three. I'm doing this because I can see Warren, even though he's sitting down. And one thing I will say about all of them through all the, oh man, hard stuff they've had to deal with, whether it's the reality of a dam possibly breaking and how terrifying that is, and then all the things that L'Oreal and Toby have had to deal with, they've kept a smile on their faces, right? And they've kept working and just remained really good people. And they still show up, and they still have a smile on their face. And I'm not sure, after all those hardships or after 51 years of service, I'd still have such a nice and pleasant demeanor about me. But I admire that about all three of you. L'Oreal and Toby will still get to work together, so that's exciting. So this isn't really goodbye. It's I'll bug you soon. And, you know, it is cheesy to say, but all three of them have done so much for the citizens of Texas. I mean, we just can't put it into words. So with that, I'll stop, but thank you all.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Janeka.
I appreciate the opportunity to recognize these three wonderful individuals, these true public servants. My immediate response, you shared Warren's length of service and 51 years. I thought, damn, safety is absolutely going to take a hit in Texas. That is really going to lose a big legacy of information there. But truly embodied an open door, welcoming resource to everyone in the agency. When I joined as a section manager, Warren was right there, immediately available within the critical infrastructure division, where they're dealing with real daily problems, crisis problems on a day-to-day basis. But he was very mindful of the needs of tending that agency's human element and answering my questions as somebody just blundering around the agency. And similarly, L'Oreal and Toby both embody something that this agency struggles and I think does accomplish but continues to need to challenge itself to do, and that's to try to find a way to be more human. And they are truly human colleagues to have been in the trenches with over the short time that I've been able to serve with all of them. And I'm really grateful and wish L'Oreal and Toby well in your adventures. Warren, I wish you well as well. You're leaving a legacy, not just at our agency, but across this state and in other places, and I'm excited to watch that legacy grow. Thank you all.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Warren, I have a little something for you. If you'll meet me at the podium, I want to give something to you. So Warren, I've got a certificate for you, and it reads, "The Texas Commission on Environmental Quality recognizes your 51 years of outstanding service to the state of Texas. We are grateful for your leadership, dedication, and significant contributions to the dam safety program."
Thank you.
To be recognized with a certificate, you must have worked for more than a half a century. So L'Oreal and Toby, I have no certificates for you. But I would like to invite you to say a few words if you'd like to do so. Now would be an opportunity to do that. They're distracted.
They're blowing you off.
Does everybody else see how hard it is to get on their schedule and their attention now? It's amazing how quickly they turn to other problems.
Texas Water Development Board member L'Oreal Stepney.
Oh, my goodness.
Good morning.
I can't even believe it. Thank you, Chairman, Commissioner Lindley, Commissioner Janeka. I just wanted to say this is very emotional for me after so many years at the agency. My last agenda, I can't even think about it more than for 5 seconds. I just wanted to thank all of my coworkers, all of the folks I worked with over the years. It's been incredible. It's hard to duplicate the whole family atmosphere that TCEQ has, especially when we do really hard things, and sometimes we don't get a thank you for those really hard things. But I appreciate everyone. I also wanted to say thank you to my former bosses and apologize for anything that I did that probably wouldn't be okay today, but I've loved every minute of it, and I look forward to working with the agency at the Water Development Board. Thank you.
Thanks, L'Oreal. Toby.
Chairman, as always, I have no notes. Toby Baker, for the record, Executive Director. I'm going to try to keep it together and not be melodramatic, but there's a chance it could go that way. First of all, thank you to you guys. Emily, your sense of humor, exactly when it was needed. Chairman, sitting in your office telling stories about our passion for the outdoors. Bobby, going all the way back to grad school in the legislature, your passion for staff. You guys are a great team. Your leadership is to be commended. And leaders in your own right, you gave me the ability to run this place, which I appreciate and respect. Oftentimes, I think you probably had the inkling that you wanted to get involved, but you didn't, and I appreciate that. However, you did push me at the right times. You offered counsel at the right times, and it made us better. And I have to thank you for your leadership. I'm going to name a few people, and I'm going to try not to drag this out too long, but in the executive office, I have to mention Stephanie Bergeron-Purdue, who graciously stepped into the DED role for me. And at one point, for the people out here who don't know, we were the only people on this campus when the pandemic hit. She was sitting on one side of a conference table. I was sitting on the other with a bottle of hand sanitizer in the middle of us when we didn't know what this was. And this place was empty. And somehow we got through it. L'Oreal Stepney, her commitment to the culture of this agency, her mind, the ability to take apart a decision or a problem with the precision of an engineer. The Water Development Board is very lucky to have you. Stephen Shar, I call him the ninja. He honestly has the ability to get in front of any problem before it gets here, and somehow I have a view into what's coming before it hits, and it is incredibly helpful, and he's become a dear friend over these years. Ramiro Garcia, who I don't think is here, I didn't see him, brother from another mother, who is maybe the most loyal person I've ever met and is a true hero for the morale of this agency. Denise, the ship would have sunk, the trains would have derailed, the planes would have crashed into the mountains. That's all I have to say about that. Had you not been here. Susan, Jocelyn, Tracy, the executive team is top-notch. Commissioners, I leave you with some of the best directors in the state of Texas. Craig Prisloff, who did a cannonball into a lake of fire when he decided to join us. Carrie Michelle, who vacations on that lake of fire, I think. Tanya, who revamped air permits. Kelly, who was here through COVID and made it happen I can't remember how many laptops we got deployed so quickly. Brent with his Brentisms and that West Texas wisdom, the unflappable Brent Wade. Aaron, who I have had so many phone calls with in private that nobody will ever know about, trying to get counsel on different things. It's a great team. But most of all, I'm going to finish with this. George Bush said, public service is a noble calling, and nowhere has that noble calling been fulfilled more than at our staff level. The staff of this agency is where the rubber meets the road, the tip of the spear. They're the reason why we are able to function as an agency. They are the heartbeat of this agency. And they're the reason we're all where we are. They are incredibly special, incredible servants of the state of Texas, and incredibly loyal to the mission that the legislature has given us. I could not be more proud to have served in this capacity. I've said it many times, they made my job easy. Way easier than it should have been. In some really hard, really hard situations. I'm trying to remember if I hit all the directors. My mind's all over the place. If I forgot you, I apologize. I'm kind of a mess this morning. With that being said, we will continue to work together, and I will leave you with this. God bless Texas, and God bless the TCEQ. Thank you, guys.
Toby, thank you for those really powerful comments. Clearly, it's the end of several eras today, but not the end of the era of our outstanding staff or of their dedication to public service, to serving the citizens of this state, or the era of remarkable leadership. This agency really is blessed. For our visitors this morning, thank you very much for indulging that TCQ family moment. With that, let's get down to business. I want to thank everyone for being with us. And Ms. Smith, I'll ask you to please call the first item.
Item number 1 is the consideration of the motion to overturn the executive director's issuance of new source review permit number 6606 to Flint Hills Resources, Ingleside. Move-in should speak first, followed by the applicant, the ED, and OPIC. Each party will have a 5-minute time limit for oral arguments, and the move-ins may reserve time for rebuttal as they bear the burden of proof. And I believe we have Mr. Colin Cox for the move-in.
Good morning, Mr. Cox. I think I may have left the mic on. You might.
It's on.
All right, great. Go ahead when you're ready.
Good morning, Chairman Neerman, Commissioners Lindley and Janeka. My name is Colin Cox with Environmental Integrity Project. I'm here today on behalf of Ingleside on the Bay Coastal Watch Association and the Coastal Alliance to Protect Our Environment. This permit increases annual throughput at the terminal from 138 million barrels to 187 million barrels. In doing so, the amendment also increases sulfur dioxide emissions above 40 tons per year, which means that this amendment must be processed as a major amendment, or as a major modification according to 40 CFR 5221 R4. The only point of disagreement between the move-ins and your staff is whether the commission should consider emissions from a prior recent amendment. Flint Hills got that prior amendment, also a minor modification, in 2019, authorizing an expansion of the terminal. The only reason they could get a minor permit for sulfur dioxide at that point was because of the annual throughput limit. That 2019 throughput limit ensured that the project would not exceed the 40-ton per year major modification threshold for SO2. That limit, the limit that Flint Hills 2019 synthetic minor permit was based on, that's the limit that Flint Hills now seeks to increase by 35%. To be clear, there's no new project here. Flint Hills proposes no new construction. It's unreasonable to believe that the increase in throughput and the consequent increase in emissions is untethered to that 2019 expansion, without which it would be impossible. The Commission should grant this motion because federal law requires that this be treated as a major amendment under 5221R4. 5221R4 says that if you relax an operational limit of a minor permit and cause the emissions to exceed the major modification threshold, it must be processed as a major amendment. The EPA guidance on this is clear. The whole point is that you can't let a source construct a minor modification or a minor source and then just relax the minor limit later and operate it as a major source. Flint Hills would have you believe that this permit amendment is not substantially related to their 2019 expansion project and should not be aggregated. But this ignores the simple facts. Under EPA's policy, the test for substantially related is whether there's a technical or economic interconnection and whether the project took place close in time. Here, the technical and economic interconnection is total. The overlap is 100%. Flint Hills proposes no construction and no physical modification in this amendment. There's nothing technically discrete. There aren't even two things to even talk about connecting. There's only one plant, expanded in 2019. What Flint Hills proposes is not a new project, but merely to push more product through the terminal. Without the 2019 expansion project, it would be impossible and unreasonable for Flint Hills to apply for this increase in throughput. The increase in throughput also took place close in time to the expansion. As I said, all construction took place as part of a single capital improvement project in 2019. Further, in 2019, before the expanded terminal even began operating, Flint Hills signed a commercial contract committing it to the increase that it seeks here, meaning that Flint Hills had already promised this increased throughput to its customers more than 3 years ago and before the terminal even began operating. Flint Hills cannot reasonably claim the presumption against aggregation for projects that took place 3 years apart. And even if they could, the technical and economic interconnections overcome that presumption. Because this increase in throughput is entirely dependent on and technically and economically interconnected to the 2019 expansion project, and because Flint Hills committed to the increase before the expanded terminal even began operating, the increase is substantially related to the expansion and the emissions must be aggregated, and the amendment must be processed as a major modification for sulfur dioxide. By ignoring 5221R4 and grossly misapplying the aggregation policy, Flint Hills and the executive director have denied my clients Clean Air Act protections, including impacts analysis, federal pollution control technology review, and additional public participation opportunities. These vital protections ensure that major expansions like this one are protective of human health and the environment. The people of Ingleside on the Bay and surrounding communities deserve these protections. We're asking the Commission to grant our motion to overturn the permit and remand the matter to the executive director for processing as a major amendment for sulfur dioxide. I'd like to save my remaining time for rebuttal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Colleagues, any questions for Mr. Cox? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have Mr. McDonald for the applicant.
Good morning, Mr. McDonald.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioner Lindley, Commissioner Janeka. My name is Derek McDonald, and I'm with the law firm of Baker Botts, and I'm here on behalf of the applicant, Flint Hills. And we're the holder of permit 606 for the Ingleside Terminal. With me today are Chris Thiele, Senior Environmental Counsel, Bill Oswalt, a Government Regulatory Affairs Director, as well as Brent Peterson, the lead environmental engineer for this project. We respectfully request that the Commission deny the motion today because there is no basis in law or fact to support it. Flint Hills and the Executive Director staff worked together closely and followed all proper procedure and law in connection with the approval of the October 11th, 2022 permit amendment. This conclusion is readily apparent when you look at the facts before you as well as the law. The Ingleside Terminal, a little bit about the facts, has the physical capability of loading 13 vessels per month of crude oil and condensate. The recent amendment allows those 13 vessels to be of a larger size called the Suez Max vessel tankers, and they're named that because that's the maximum width of a tanker that can fit through the Suez Canal. To remain commercially viable and competitive with the other terminals, Flint Hills needed to increase the annual throughput limit in order to allow the full loading of these Suez Max tankers based on work that had been done by the Corpus Christi to deepen and widen the ship channel there. There was a lot of work done by the port to improve its channel, to make it improve the capability to accept these types of vessels. And there was a lot of work done by Flint Hills to ready itself to be able to make the terminal available to accept and load those bigger tankers. There was permitting before the Corps. There was dredging work to be done to bring that ship channel closer to the terminal to allow that. And all of this work, and there was a permit amendment to be sought, and all of that happened in 2019 and after. Before the port's work on this channel deepening project and Flint Hills' own work, only smaller vessels could be loaded, and hence that's why Flint Hills had permitted a lower throughput for the terminal in 2019. That reflected the maximum capability of the terminal to load 13 vessels per month of a smaller size. Movement suggests there's no context between the two. There's a lot of context here. There are a lot of differences between what was happening in 2019 and what was available to be loaded at the terminal and what was happening now in 2022 and what their opportunities are. The movement at first said this wasn't about project aggregation, but instead about impermissible relaxation under 5221R4. But the relaxation claim is only relevant if the two projects are aggregated, causing the SO2 emissions to exceed the PSD threshold. As EPA stated at 64 Fed Reg 19097, the legal prohibition of relaxation is a safeguard to prevent sources from improperly disaggregating major modification into two separate projects. That's not what's happened here. We do have two separate projects, and the facts and law before you show how different these projects are. Staff made that finding in its review, technical review, and EPA and TCEQ rules and guidance support staff's decision. These permits were issued more than 3 years apart and are therefore presumed to reflect separate projects under EPA's 2018 aggregation rule, cited in the RTC, cited in our brief as well. And so they're presumed to be separate, and movements can't overcome this presumption in light of the factual background here. Flint Hills didn't accept artificial limits to try and keep its 2019 project. It permitted what it thought it could do based on what was then available, these smaller vessels, 13 of them a month, and maximally loading those vessels. And those facts changed, and a new opportunity became available for 2022. There was a conservative federal applicability analysis that was included in the permit, documenting project emissions increases below the PSD threshold. Movement claims that we wrongfully excluded MSS emissions, but there were no new MSS emissions to include in the 2022 Suez Max project. There were no new maintenance activities. Maintenance emissions are not dependent on throughput, they're dependent on the equipment. Whether you load or not, you're gonna have the same maintenance emissions available and being created by the project, so there's nothing new to authorize in 2022. And we showed in our brief that even the conservative analysis in the application was overly conservative, because there are other ways to look at this and refine that analysis, and we included that in our brief. We really think Movement's theory here is simply untenable. It's covered by the clear guidance and law on project aggregation. Their theory.
I'll ask you to go ahead and wrap up, Mr. McDonald.
Yeah, their theory really rests on the idea that we should have projected when we built this terminal all the subsequent changes and developments that would happen at the port of Corpus Christi over time, permitted those at one time, and that's not the law, and that's not the facts.
Thank you, sir. Colleagues, any questions for Mr. McDonald? All right, thank you. Let's hear next from the Executive Director staff. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. My name is Contessa Gay with the Environmental Law Division, representing the Executive Director. With me and available to answer questions is Samuel Short of the Air Permits Division. The Executive Director respectfully recommends the Commission deny the motion to overturn the Flint Hills Resources Ingleside LLC amendment to Air Quality Permit number 6606. In the review of the project, the Executive Director determined that aggregation was not necessary because the projects discussed in the motion to overturn are presumed to be separate projects, given that they were technically and economically unrelated, and the time between the projects was greater than 3 years. As a result of this review, the executive director concluded that the applicant conducted an appropriate prevention of significant deterioration review, or PSD, review. While the movement's reply brief argues the increase in sulfur dioxide should have required Flint Hills project to undergo further PSD review, this is not the case. The throughput limitation from the 2019 project was not economically unreasonable, nor does it appear that it was established to avoid federal PSD review. In addition, the amendment application did not include MSS emissions because it was neither modified nor an affected source. Flint Hills did not represent that the MSS emissions would increase due to the amendment, and the executive director's staff did not identify anything that would contradict this. Finally, the motion asserts that the executive director wrongfully denied the hearing request submitted. However, in the absence of timely hearing requests on the amendment application, there were no hearing requests to review and recommend action by the commission. For these reasons, the executive director respectfully recommends the commission deny the motion to overturn. Thank you, and we are available for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gay. Colleagues, any questions? All right, let's hear next from OPIC. Mr. Wayne, good morning.
Yes, good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and the Executive Directors, attorneys, and staff. I am Sheldon Wayne with the Office of Public Interest Counsel for the record, and we respectfully recommend granting this motion to overturn. The central disagreement in this dispute concerns whether 2.31 tons of sulfur dioxide emissions associated with maintenance and startup activities and previously included in the facility's 2019 permit amendment should be included in the emissions calculations associated with its 2021 amendment. Flint Hills and the ED take the position that these maintenance and startup emissions were properly accounted for in the facility's 2019 amendment and should not be combined or aggregated with the 2021 amendment's emissions. Movements dispute whether aggregation correctly describes the issue and instead argue the real issue is that the 2021 amendment relaxes enforceable permit emission limitations that are contained in that 2019 permit. Their position is simply that the 2021 amendment seeks to increase throughput of the facility, and in doing so, increases sulfur dioxide emissions above the major modification threshold. Movements further argue that if aggregation is to be considered, the project should be aggregated together. Per EPA guidance, projects should be substantially related to be aggregated. In spite of Flint Hill's explanation that the 2021 amendment was sought to take advantage of a discrete economic opportunity that differs from the opportunity sought in connection with the 2019 amendment, OPIC found that the following factors support a finding of aggregation. One, that the 2021 amendment could not exist without the expansion project associated with the 2019 permit amendment, and two, the relatively short period of time between the two projects. In OPIC's view, the 2.31 tons of sulfur dioxide emissions appear to be intertwined with the 2021 expansion project, and therefore with permit number 6606. This does not seem to be a case of multiple separate projects, but instead reflects the staggered increase of the facility's throughput such that OPIC believes that it should be viewed as one continuous project. To the extent that aggregation is relevant, OPIC agrees with movements that the two amendments should be aggregated, which brings the sulfur dioxide emissions above the threshold for major modifications, and therefore the application should have been subjected to PSD review and afforded the additional public participation opportunities consistent with the requirements applicable to major modifications. Thank you, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wayne. Colleagues, any questions? All right. Mr. Cox, you have 1 minute rebuttal time.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to address a couple of things that counsel for Flint Hills said that are plainly wrong. Flint Hills had the capability physically to load Suezmax vessels prior to this amendment, prior even to the 2019 expansion amendment. Like that physically it was all there. The difference is they couldn't load as many vessels with as much oil as they now want to. There were no physical changes required to have Suezmax vessels visit this thing. Now they could just load them more fully, heavier ship, deeper channel. Flint Hills claims that the dredging is somehow the physical change, but that's not a change in the plant. We're looking at an air permit. This facility, all the construction, this took part as one capital improvement project, one planning project, and now they want to run more product through that terminal. This is just a relaxation of the synthetic minor limit that permit was premised on. It was even submitted as an as-built amendment, as part of the as-built amendment. And Flint Hills has not explained why its conservative analysis from the 2021 amendment included some, but not all, of the emissions from the 2019 expansion project. Flint Hills and the
That's fine.
executive director have also failed to, they've said that this is technically and economically not connected, but they've failed to show how it's technically not connected and not related. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Colleagues, as we heard from all the parties, the central question is whether we have distinct projects that do not require aggregation, distinct projects that must be aggregated, or really a single project. My view is that the executive director's determination that these facts indicate distinct projects that do not require aggregation is reasonable, and so I'm inclined to not take an action on this motion. Commissioner Lindley.
I'm in agreement. I thought I agree with the ED's recommendation, and you.
Commissioner Ginecca.
I didn't find a basis for overturning the executive director's decision in the detailed briefings or the presentations today.
All right. There's no action necessary on this motion. It would ultimately overrule by operation of law. So, Ms. Smith, when you're ready, please call the next item.
Item number 2 is the consideration of the ALJ's proposal for decision and proposed order concerning the application by Diamondback Recycling and Sanitary Landfill, LP, for new municipal solid waste landfill permit number 2404. The applicant should go first, followed by the protestants, the ED, and then OPIC. The following oral argument, or parties will have the following oral argument time limits. Applicant, 12 minutes. Protestants, 12 minutes collectively. The ED, 7 minutes, and OPIC, 7 minutes. And the applicant may reserve time for rebuttal as it bears the burden of proof on this application. And so we will begin with the applicant, Mr. Mike Woodward.
Good morning, Mr. Woodward.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Shall I proceed?
I think we've got your exhibits up and we're ready to go.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here this morning. It's been a long time since I've appeared before the commission. I think it's the first time I've appeared before this iteration of the commission. So good morning, Mr. Chairman, commissioners, executive director, Madam General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. My name is Mike Woodward. I'm with the firm Hans Scarborough. Trey Wasdorf is co-counsel with me today, and we represent Diamondback Recycling and Sanitary Landfill. Diamondback is a family-owned business, keeping with the family theme today. It was formed by Michael and Esme Valenzuela, who are here with us today, with their children. They drove down from Odessa. They're Odessans, born and raised, raising their family there in Odessa. They brought in partners, the Underwood brothers, Anthony and Stephen, as investors into the project. They are also here today. Valenzuela's got into the solid waste business in 2004 when they started Basin Disposal, which was a trash hauling business. And they've grown that business in almost 20 years to 17 trucks, 19 employees, serving 4,000 customers in the Permian Basin. They've done that with their own sweat, time, and tears. They're active volunteers in the city of Odessa. They're active with the Keep Odessa Beautiful campaign. And through this experience, I've seen there was a need in Odessa, and they wanted to meet that need and stepped out and trying to get permits to open this landfill. One of the drivers for it is they want to start a recycling facility in Odessa, and they've got the support of the city of Odessa and Ector County. And one of the things that they've learned is they have to have a co-located landfill in order to be able to economically operate a recycling facility. They found their property in 2016 and got a registration from the TCEQ to open a recycling facility. They've constructed it, and they are waiting to be able to permit and construct the landfill next to the recycling facility to get it up and operating. The tract is located in unincorporated Ector County, West Odessa. I don't know if you guys have ever been out in West Odessa, but it's flat, dry. It's speckled with oil and gas production. This is a very old, mature field. It's open ranch land with mesquites. There's some residential located within 1 mile to the east of the facility. There is no organized sewer or water services out in this area. Immediately to the south of this facility, less than a half a mile, is a gigantic oil and gas waste disposal facility, just a mountain of oil and gas waste that you can see from the Diamondback facility. Further to the south, you can also see it because you can see to the horizon out there, is 2.5 miles is a municipal solid waste facility operated by Republic Waste. Diamondback hired Park Hill out of Lubbock to be their registered professional engineers to work on this application. Park Hill is based out of Lubbock. They have offices throughout Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma, and they've provided solid waste engineering services for over 50 years, primarily focusing on municipal clients in West Texas. Some of their clients are Lubbock, Midland, Big Spring, El Paso, Brownfield, Lamesa, just to name a few. They design landfills, they permit landfills, they oversee the construction of landfills, but most importantly, they design drainage facilities for landfills. They know what they're doing. The ALJ, in her proposal for decision, has recommended denial of the Diamondback landfill application on one issue. There were 20 issues referred, and some of them were settled, but it was one issue that seems to be hanging up on this permit application, and it's the sufficiency of the drainage report. And the drainage report is based upon essentially her decision, which we think is erroneous and is in contravention of the TCEQ regulations. She's recommending denial because the stormwater ponds are too small. This is West Texas, and those stormwater ponds are going to be empty 99% of the time, but it's that one storm event you get every 25 years when you have to make sure that you control the runoff, that it doesn't negatively impact the drainage area. We're not talking about contaminated stormwater. We're talking about non-contact, uncontaminated stormwater and impacts on the drainage area. Application clearly shows there's going to be no impact to the drainage areas. The method for calculating peak discharge off of a facility is specifically named in the regulations. It's the rational method. And at 30 TAC 330.305 F1, it says for drainage basins less than 200 acres, you must use the rational method. And the rational method is an interesting thing. It's been around since the mid-1800s. And it's a very simple formula. It's Q equals CIA. Q is the peak flow off of a facility. This drawing here on my right is the undeveloped facility, and you're required to calculate the peak flow from the facility. You use the runoff coefficients, rainfall intensity, where you plug in the 25-year storm event, and the acreage. And it's a simple calculation, and you pick a point of interest to compare to the developed facility, which is a drawing here on my left. And you'll see we've got CPA and CPB, where the peak flow calculations were made, and then you use the modified rational method to calculate the size of the ponds to make sure that the discharge from the developed facility, which is going to occur 40, 50 years from now, meet or are similar to the peak flow from the undeveloped facility. That's exactly what the applicant did. That's what the professional engineers did. Opposition did not dispute the inputs into the rational method. As a matter of fact, the test of the witness for opposition said they're reasonable, and he used them. But what he did is he took the rational method and he divided it by L. That's not the rational method. That's a whole nother formula. It's a whole nother calculation that gets a different number. But he justified it and said that there were reasons why they needed to make these amendments to it, but that's not what the regulations allow. And that's the basis upon which she is making her recommendation of denial. The calculations provided by the opposition were unsealed. He's an engineer, but he didn't provide them, but he provided a very persuasive argument. And obviously the judge bought it, but she bought it in violation of the regulations of the TCEQ. Diamondback hired professional engineers to prepare this application for them. They relied on those professional engineers to do it in accordance with TCEQ regulations. After thorough review of the application, the staff, professional staff, the TCEQ found that everything complied with the regulations of TCEQ, including the drainage report. The reviewers never said the ponds were too small. And if they had said the ponds were too small, then the Valenzuelas of the Diamondback Recycling would have said, build me larger ponds. But that never happened. For these reasons, on behalf of Diamondback, I respectfully request that you overrule the PFD and issue permit 2404 to Diamondback Recycling. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Woodward. Looks like you have about 3 minutes for rebuttal when we get to that. Any questions, colleagues? Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Would you want me to remove these?
Why don't you take those down for the next presenter? Thank you. And we have protestants up next. Ms. Perales, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. You ready for me to begin?
Go ahead,
Okay.
please. Thank you.
My name is Marisa Perales, and I'm here on behalf of Knox Real Estate Development, one of the protestants in this case. And I'll be focusing my comments on the applicant's failure to comply with the surface water drainage requirements in the permit application. Now, the main objective of the regs is to ensure that once the landfill is fully developed, existing drainage patterns will not be adversely altered. And here, the applicant simply failed to make this demonstration. And in fact, the evidence presented by their own witnesses demonstrates that existing drainage patterns will indeed be adversely altered. Peak flow rates will significantly increase as the surface water leaves the site and flows downstream towards my client's property. Now, you've heard a lot about Mr. Dunbar, who was testifying on behalf of my client, but before we get to his testimony, it's helpful to go over some of the facts that were not disputed, for which there was no contrary evidence presented. First, surface water drains, for the most part, towards the east and the northeast of the property boundary via overland flow, sheet flow, not channelized flow. That means that the flow exits all along that eastern boundary, not at any one single discrete discharge point. But when the applicant calculated the peak flow rates for the large drainage areas that flow towards the east, he assigned those peak flow rates for those large drainage areas to single discrete discharge points. So the peak flow rate for drainage area A was assigned to comparison point A. Peak flow rates for drainage area B was assigned to single comparison point B. That means that the applicant overestimated the peak flow rate under existing conditions at these points. So when they compared peak flow rates under the fully developed conditions to the existing conditions, it appeared that there was no adverse alteration, but only because the applicant overestimated those peak flow rates for their baseline existing conditions. So they simply didn't meet their burden of proof based on their own evidence to demonstrate that the drainage patterns will not be adversely altered because their baseline data was inaccurate and they overestimated their peak flows. What Mr. Dunbar did was he provided a rough estimate as to what those peak flows would have been had they reflected the real-world conditions. So he assumed that water is draining all along the northeastern boundary. He focused on the 2 areas where the water is proposed to be discharged once the landfill is fully developed. He calculated what the peak flows for those 2 areas would be under existing conditions, assuming that the water exits all along the boundary. In other words, the portion of the water that exits at those locations is what he estimated. And he came up with vastly different values than the applicants, along the lines of 5 CFS compared to the applicant's 65 CFS. And it wasn't Knox's burden, and it wasn't Mr. Dunbar's burden to provide these calculations. The applicant had already demonstrated that their calculations for existing conditions were overestimated. Mr. Dunbar simply demonstrated the degree to which those figures were overestimated. In sum, the applicant didn't satisfy their burden that there would be no adverse alterations. Now, even if we were to assume, just for the sake of argument, that they had accurately calculated peak flow rates for existing conditions, though they didn't, they still failed to meet their burden because the detention ponds that they're relying on to reduce peak flow rates are undersized. Again, I'll focus only on the evidence in the record that was presented by the applicant, and it's undisputed. So, not talking about the calculations that were made up here, but just the evidence that was in the record. The applicant's engineer stated that the hydrographs he created as exhibits for the hearing were based on information from the application, but they didn't reflect the 25-year, 24-hour storm event because he didn't think he had to. He didn't think he had to use that storm event. The drainage report in the application does have a couple of statements saying that the ponds are designed to handle the 25-24 storm event, but there's no basis for that statement in the application. No hydrographs, no calculations, nothing for the ED to consider to determine whether that statement was accurate. And throughout the hearing, throughout the discovery process, pre-filed testimony, we made this clear. We pointed this out to the applicant, that there's nothing in the application to support that statement. And in fact, it appeared that the ponds were not designed using the proper storm event. So the applicant's engineer thereafter prepared his exhibit, the hydrograph, finally. And he testified that this hydrograph is based on the application information. But when asked if it reflected the 25-year, 24-hour storm event, he admitted that it didn't because he didn't think he had to. And it doesn't. The hydrograph and the application materials reflect that the detention ponds are not designed using that regulated storm event. What Dunbar did was he roughly illustrated via a rough hydrograph what the inflows into the ponds from that storm event would look like. And what it looked like was water overtopping those ponds pretty quickly before we even got to the peak flow. That's not enough storage in the ponds to reduce peak flow, and it's that simple. Sure, it may be dry out there most of the time, but we're talking about the flashy storm events. And the applicant simply failed to demonstrate that their ponds could handle those. This case isn't about whether the applicant used the rational method or the modified rational method. It's not about any equations. It's pretty simple. It's simply whether the ponds were designed with the proper storm event, and they weren't. Real quickly, I'll just mention that the ED's request for a remand is curious because it's not based on this idea that there could be any change to the application or redesign of the ponds or newly discovered evidence. It's basically requesting a remand to allow the applicant another bite at the apple to support their deficient application. But the applicant has known what the issues are here from the beginning. We put them in our comments, we went through discovery, we had depositions, we had pre-filed testimony, and they've never corrected those deficiencies. There's no need for a remand here, and a remand would just create bad precedent. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perales. Let's hear next from the executive director staff. Oh, forgive me, Mr. Allman, you're splitting your time.
We're splitting our time.
I apologize.
Slightly different protestants. Good morning,
Yes,
Chairman.
sir, go ahead.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, and General Counsel. My name is Eric Allman. I represent Jason Harrington. I will primarily address the errors in the ALJ's allocation of transcript costs, the evaluation of land use, and groundwater. But I guess first I'll say I grew up in Midland, Texas, and we had a saying that we may only get 13 inches of rain a year, but you ought to be here on the day we get it. And so to minimize the importance of drainage would be a mistake in this matter. Now, on transcript costs, the ALJ's recommendation that protestants bear 70% of the transcript costs departed from commission precedent that exceptional circumstances must be present to justify assessing a high proportion of transcript costs against the protestants. With regard to land use, the ALJ violated commission precedent by imposing a burden of proof upon the protestants. In evaluating groundwater, the ALJ's decision is contrary to TC requirement that an applicant provide a thorough characterization of groundwater. I'll begin with transcript costs. Historically, the Commission has avoided the imposition of a high proportion of transcript costs upon protestants because due process should not come with a price tag, and the best protestants can hope for from the hearing process is maintenance of the status quo. Nothing about this case justifies allocating 70% of the transcript costs as the ALJ recommends. The protestants helped to limit the proceeding by agreeing to the summary disposition on certain issues prior to the hearing on the merits, and agreeing to the conduct of argument on certain motions off the record so they were not transcribed. Protestants had reasoned good faith arguments for the issues addressed during the hearing on merits, and at the hearing stage, protestants prevailed on the ultimate question of whether the permit should be granted. The protestants presented only 2 witnesses in comparison to the 6 witnesses presented by the applicant, and the court reporter engaged by the applicant initially refused to file the transcript with the TCQ, which resulted in the applicant having the transcript for a week longer than any of the other parties, including the ED and the Public Interest Council. Now, in addition, the applicant has not disclosed whether or not it requested for the transcript to be expedited, which would add additional costs. The Commission has always made sure the party requesting that a transcript be expedited is the party that bears the burden, the cost of that expedition, which is not something the ALJ even addressed here. We don't even know how much the transcript costs are. Now, the Commission need not reach issues of land use or groundwater protection if the permit is rightfully denied based on drainage, but the ALJ's evaluation of those issues do raise important questions. The ALJ's finding that the landfill is a compatible land use rests entirely on the ALJ's finding that the protestants have not overcome the prima facie presumption in favor of the applicant. This is directly contrary to Commission precedent that the protestants bear only the burden of production, not a burden of persuasion. Here, the landfill site is crisscrossed by easements for oil and gas activities. There are multiple active oil wells on the landfill site and numerous wells within the landfill footprint, including an active well. Comments submitted by the current oil and gas operator in the record explain how this applicant's prior conduct on the site has damaged the operations equipment and poses a safety risk. Yet, the site operating plan contains no specific provisions to address these potential operational conflicts. The protestants presented testimony from Dr. Zornberg, who is a professor at UT and has given trainings to UT personnel, who testified based upon these considerations specifically that the application did not meet the Commission's rules regarding land use compatibility. The applicant presented no land use compatibility analysis. Quite simply, under TC precedent, the protestants bear only a burden of production, and the protestants met this burden of production. The ALJ did not even evaluate whether the applicant met a burden of proof. The applicant has not done that, and the land use issue serves as an independent basis to deny the permit in addition to the drainage issue. The ALJ also fundamentally erred in accepting the applicant's characterization of groundwater. TCQ rules require an applicant to provide a thorough characterization of groundwater, and the rules provide that a seasonal high groundwater level is the highest measured level of groundwater. In this case, against the advice of its initial engineer, because the applicant went through 2 engineers, it had an initial firm who made one recommendation on groundwater that it fired and moved on to a separate. The initial one said you need to do 12 months to capture all seasons. They moved on to another engineering firm and took only 4 readings in April, May, June, and July of 2019. Nothing in the fall, nothing in the winter. The executive director's own expert testified these readings may or may not reflect seasonal variation in the water level. Yet the ALJ concluded that the Commission must accept the highest measured water level without an examination of whether an applicant took adequate samples to provide a representative characterization of the groundwater. Since the design of the groundwater monitoring system is premised upon the seasonal high water level, potential error in the characterization of the seasonal high water level results in a groundwater monitoring system that has not been sufficiently demonstrated as capable of protecting groundwater. And accordingly, the application should be denied on this ground in addition to those previously mentioned. Thank you, and I'm available for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Allman. Colleagues, any questions? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, now we'll turn to the Executive Director's staff. Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. I'm Anthony Tetu. I'm an attorney with the Environmental Law Division, and with me today I have Chandra Yadav and Mamaded Baldu with Waste Permits. We're all here this morning on behalf of the Executive Director. In the proposal for decision that's before you today, the Administrative Law Judge concluded that the applicant, Diamondback Recycling and Sanitary Landfill, LP, met its burden of proof on all of the referred issues with the exception of one, which is whether they provided an adequate surface water drainage report in the application. The Executive Director respectfully disagrees with the conclusion regarding the surface water drainage report and will briefly discuss this issue. The TCEQ rules require the applicant to provide a surface water drainage report that demonstrates that it will design, construct, maintain, and operate the proposed landfill to manage run-on and runoff during the peak discharge from at least a 25-year storm and prevent off-site discharge of waste and contaminated stormwater. They need to provide structures to collect and control at least the water volume resulting from the 24-hour, 25-year storm, and protect the landfill from washouts and demonstrate that the existing drainage patterns are not adversely altered. The Executive Director's expert witness, Mr. Yadav, testified that the applicant provided a surface water drainage report in Attachment C of Part 3 of the application, which meets these rule requirements. With regard to the rule that requires the applicant to demonstrate that existing drainage patterns will not be altered, TCEQ guidance, which was admitted into the record, recommends using the rational method in calculating drainage flow. Diamondback's application did use the rational method to calculate existing drainage patterns. In addition, the applicant used the modified rational method to calculate detention pond size, and the modified rational method was accepted for use by the TCEQ when reviewing the application. The Executive Director does not agree with the ALJ's conclusion that the applicant did not use the 25-year, 24-hour storm when designing the detention ponds. Based on reviewing the application and considering all the evidence and arguments, the ED concludes that all regulatory requirements for an MSW landfill have been met. The Executive Director stands by the preliminary decision to issue the MSW permit. There is some confusion regarding the use of the modified rational method and whether the applicant used the 25-year, 24-hour storm event when designing the detention ponds. Therefore, the Executive Director respectfully recommends that the Commission either overturn the relevant findings of facts and conclusions of laws in the PFD and grant the permit, or in the alternative, remand the application to allow additional evidence regarding the issue of whether the applicant has provided an adequate surface water drainage report. We're available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tetu. Colleagues, any questions? All right, let's hear next from Mr. Arthur. Good morning.
Thank you, and good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. For the record, I'm Garrett Arthur, TCEQ Public Interest Counsel. Applicant Diamondback bears the burden of proof on each referred issue, and by rule, must meet that burden by a preponderance of the evidence. In Issue M of the Commission's interim order, the Commission asked whether applicant provided a sufficient surface water drainage report. TCEQ regulations require a surface water drainage report to demonstrate that existing drainage patterns will not be adversely altered. Based on a preponderance of the record evidence, OPIC found that applicant's surface water drainage report fails to demonstrate that existing drainage patterns will not be adversely altered. Specifically, applicant overestimated existing runoff velocity and peak flow by making assumptions that do not accurately reflect on-site conditions. And applicant's proposed detention ponds are too small. and the peak flow rates of water discharged from the ponds will exceed existing peak flow rates. As a result, OPIC must conclude applicant failed to prove that it provided a sufficient surface water drainage report. Applicant's failure to meet its burden on issue M is a basis to deny this application. Thank you, and I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Arthur. Colleagues, any questions? Okay. I need a quick sidebar with council as I gather my thoughts. Give me a moment. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Woodward, you have 3 minutes for rebuttal, sir.
Thank you. What Opposition and Public Interest Counsel is asking the applicant to do here is to carry the burden of proof on the rational method that is mandated in the regulations. They're asking the applicant to come in and explain how and why the rational method works. The rational method specifically says pick a point to compare. And the rational method takes into account the input calculations, the site-specific hydraulics. So if it's sheet flow, then when you calculate the time of concentration, you're calculating sheet flow. You're calculating concentrated shallow flow. That's built into the calculations. And so the applicant is being punished here potentially by not carrying the burden of proof and explaining how the rational method works or why it's being applied. But the applicant doesn't have the luxury of modifying the rational method. It has to use the rational method. And when you go to the modified rational method, it's a standard engineering practice accepted in the state of Texas. It's utilized by the Texas Highway Department. It's accepted by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. It utilizes the same inputs as the rational method. That's how the volume is calculated in these ponds based upon the 25-year storm event. It's a total misrepresentation to say that the 25-year storm event was not utilized. Hydrographs that are built to the modified rational method represent the full 24 hours. But you're looking for peak events. And peak events are when the rainfall intensity is such that you're going to get a peak runoff. And over the 24 hours, if that peak event ran through the whole 24 hours, it doesn't matter what size ponds you have. Then you're way beyond the 25-year event. So the hydrograph represented a period of time when you're going to get that peak rainfall. But he didn't have all 24 hours of hydrographs in his representation. So it's a total misrepresentation to say that the 25-year event was not utilized. Irresponsible, if you ask me. With regard to transcript cross, I'll try not to get emotional about this. This was a Zoom hearing. Nobody requested a court reporter. We got a call from SOA the day before the hearing saying, you got to have a court reporter there. We scrambled. We found a court reporter and got him there. I had to contract him with my law firm. We're not really worried about transcript cross, to be honest with you. They're already paid. I don't know who we would go get reimbursement from at this stage of the game. But I do think it's important to note that the opposition who didn't participate in the hearing, who's not here today, also did not pay for his lawyers and did not pay for his experts. I don't know who the shadow group behind is supporting this opposition, but this commission needs to know that there's something going on out there that just totally insults us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Woodward. Mr. Ahmed, just a moment. Just take a moment. And not more than a moment is what I'm saying. Go ahead, sir.
We object to the discussion At the end of that, it ventured into facts not into the record.
Noted.
And this commission is limited to that.
Thank you, Mr. Allman. Colleagues, I need just another few minutes with council before as I sort out my thoughts. Yeah. All right, colleagues, I'm back. We do remain on the record. We were never in recess officially. Colleagues, I am comfortable with the ALJ's findings and conclusions with the exception of the drainage issue M. The protestants expert, Mr. Dunbar, does raise questions about the applicant's demonstration on surface water drainage, but I'm not convinced, in fact, I'm a little skeptical that he submitted sufficient evidence to raise a genuine issue of fact. For example, Mr. Dunbar failed to identify any legal basis for his assertion that comparison points are inappropriate for calculating peak flows. He reaches a conclusion without referencing any statute or rule or guidance, nor does Mr. Dunbar meaningfully explain the data on which his peak flow rate calculations are made, nor does he identify the method that he used. In fact, he testified that he wasn't sure of the name of the method. As for pond sizing, he offers a set of hydrographs that present conclusions, but without explaining or describing the bases of his work. And this is a minor point in my mind, but it does seem to go a little bit to credibility. But Mr. Dunbar's work was presented without an engineering seal, and that seems like a minor thing that's pretty easily corrected. Mr. Dunbar apparently made a compelling witness, but looking at the record, I'm not sure that he presented enough evidence to raise a genuine issue of fact to justify permit denial. At the same time, I have to say I'm not overwhelmed with the applicant's response to the issues raised by Mr. Dunbar. I would like a better explanation of how the applicant's peak flow calculations fully considered pre-development flow. I'd like to know how the ponds, the weir structures, and other drainage features mitigate flow rates and velocities. As for pond sizing, I'd like the applicant to better explain its own hydrographs and modified rational method analysis. So I think what we're looking at here, at least in my view, colleagues, is really a jump ball on issue M. Although the applicant does bear the burden of proof on the application, once the prima facie demonstration is admitted at SOA, denial of the permit is only appropriate if a protestant rebuts a demonstration with sufficient evidence to show that the permit violates a statute or federal requirement or on one or more of the referred issues. Raising an issue without sufficient evidence is not quite enough to get us there. I would like to give the protestants another opportunity to adequately rebut the applicant's prima facie case, and I'd like to give the applicant the opportunity to provide a better explanation of the sufficiency of its evidence in response to protestants' rebuttal evidence. So I would suggest a remand on issue M. I also want to identify some specific concerns that I have with the current PFD. First, I don't believe that the current record evidence supports the ALJ's conclusion that the applicant's engineer failed to use the 25-year, 24-hour storm. An excerpt from a correction to a deposition without any other context or foundation, in my view, is not an adequate basis for that conclusion. Second, I'm not convinced that the applicant's use of the modified rational method for pond sizing was inappropriate. The record indicates that the executive director has acknowledged use of that method in past applications and approved the applicant's use of it in this application. Section 330.305F1 that was cited earlier requires the use of the rational method or an equivalent or better method approved by the executive director. I think the rule may have been satisfied in this case. The remand evidence can demonstrate whether that is in fact the case. We heard argument on transcript costs this morning. I think if we do send this back on remand, as I'm recommending, we can sort out the transcript costs issue when it comes back to it. So that's where I've landed. Commissioner Lindley, what are your thoughts?
I'm in agreement. I could, I didn't agree with the judge's ultimate decision of denial, but I agree with you that a remand just on issue M is probably most appropriate. The only thing I would add to everything you said is I would just like to talk about the timing of the remand. In my opinion, I want this to be finalized sooner rather than later. And so, I just look at when the application came in, when we referred it, that was all in 2019. So I would encourage, if we do end up remanding it on this one issue to SOA, that the remand hearing and the supplemental PFD move quickly. And, I would love to say no more than 180 days. I don't know if that turnaround's possible, but that's what I would like to see if we move forward with a remand on one issue.
Commissioner Janeka.
I appreciate those views and raising that point specifically on timing, Commissioner Lindley. I don't think I disagree there. We haven't exercised the use of shorter referral timelines recently, given the posture of the state government across the board. I have one point I want to raise, and I agree with you, Chairman, on the burden of proof. I think an applicant bears the burden of proof on the application, but Senate Bill 709 provides that the burden is initially satisfied when the administrative record is admitted to SOA. From that point, a protestant can rebut the demonstration with sufficient evidence on a referred issue that shows that the permit violates a state or federal requirement. I think there's a lot of discussion and statements about that burden of proof and which party bears the burden. I'll simply say I agree with you that while the record unfortunately doesn't look clear enough to move forward with denial, it neither has a clear basis within it to overrule or overturn those. points and arrive at a issuance point, so I'm in agreement as well on remand.
Thank you. I certainly don't have an issue with putting a deadline on SOA's work on this matter, and
I look at all the parties involved. I'm making an assumption, but I think they'd appreciate that. There's a lot of probably legal fees that have been paid along the way, and I just want it to move quickly. That'd be mine.
are we ready for a motion?
Give me 1 second,
Sure.
unless,
I think I could.
if
I
you
could
have one, that's fine.
Provide that motion. I move that we, a question on timeline. Is it appropriate to request or
I
set?
think we should read that into the motion.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you need a moment to gather that up.
Yeah, I'll take 1 moment.
Okay.
Excellent.
I will attempt this, and hopefully I get it right. And if not, please jump in and correct. Okay. I move that we adopt the ALJ's proposed findings and conclusions on issues A through L and N through S, and remand issue M to SOA to take additional evidence, including providing the underlying documents to support the methodologies and calculations used to meet the burden of proof on the surface water drainage issue. All parties should be given the opportunity to present additional evidence if they choose to avail themselves of that option. And I would also specify that the maximum duration of the hearing is 6 months from the remand to the issuance of the proposal for decision.
I second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Ms. Smith, when you're ready, please call the next item.
Item number 3 is the application by the Uranium Energy Corporation for renewal and amendment of permits to authorize the construction and operation of Class 1 injection wells for the disposal of industrial non-hazardous waste. The parties have been notified that the commissioners will not take oral argument but may ask questions, and those who have signed in will be noted for the record.
All right, for those who are not familiar with our process, we have a two-part analysis for considering requests for contested cases. First, we consider whether the requester has met the procedural and substantive requirements to be entitled to a contested case. And assuming that at least one requester has done so, we then consider which issues are appropriate to refer for hearing. So part 1 is about who gets a hearing, and part 2 is about which issues are referred. Requesters who are affected in a manner different from the general public and who have articulated personal concerns that are relevant and material to the permit and have done so both in timely comments and a timely hearing request are entitled to a hearing. Governmental entities can be granted a hearing if they have the statutory authority or interest in issues relevant to the application. And colleagues, on this item, we have a single request from the Goliad County Groundwater Conservation District. It's a governmental entity. It's clear to me that the district has authority over issues relevant to injection well authorizations within its boundaries, and that it has met the other procedural and substantive requirements to be entitled to a contested case. I would add that because this requester is not an association but a governmental entity, that it does not need to identify a member with standing in his or her own right. As for the issues, I've identified 3: whether the application adequately characterizes the geology, including any faults near the proposed injection wells, whether the draft permit provides for adequate monitoring of migration of injected fluids, and whether the location and design of the injection wells and pre-injection facilities are adequate. I would deny the request for rehearing, but include a concurrent ADR referral. And on the recommendation of both OPIC and the executive director, I would allow 6 months for this hearing. Commissioner Lindley.
I'm in agreement on all that.
Commissioner Janeka.
Likewise. I'm prepared with the motion as well. Unless we hear, I move that we grant the hearing requests of Goliad County Groundwater Conservation District, deny the request for reconsideration, refer the matter to SOA for a contested case hearing on the following issues. 1, whether the permit application adequately characterizes the geology and identified and assessed faults in the vicinity of the proposed injection wells. 2, whether the draft permit provides for adequate monitoring of migration of injected fluids in the vicinity of the proposed injection wells, and whether the location and design of the injection wells and pre-injection facilities are adequate. I further move that we refer the matter to the Commission's Alternative Dispute Resolution Program concurrently with the preliminary hearing scheduling efforts at SOA, and finally, that we specify the maximum duration of the hearing as 6 months from the preliminary hearing to issuance of a proposal for decision.
A second.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Ms. Smith, when you're ready, please call the next item.
Item number 4 is the application by Explore Research Corporation for new air quality permit number 165848. The parties have been notified that the commissioners will not take oral argument but may ask questions. Those who have signed in will be noted for the record.
So once again, we have a 2-part analysis for considering requests for contested cases. Part 1 is about who gets a hearing, and Part 2 is about which issues are referred. And again, requesters who are affected in a manner different from the general public, who have articulated personal concerns that are relevant and material to the permit and have done so both in timely comments and a timely hearing request, are entitled to a hearing. Associations that raise concerns that are germane to the organization's purpose and that have identified members who would have standing in their own right are entitled to a hearing. And on this item, colleagues, we have numerous requests. First up is the North San Gabriel Alliance. The Alliance's stated purpose includes environmental protection, and it has identified 2 members who have standing in their own right, so I would grant the Alliance's request. The remaining requests are from individuals, and in my review, most of those have failed to meet the requirements to be entitled to a hearing. Some have failed because they failed to file timely comments. Others live too far from the facility to be affected different from the general public. And 2 simply failed to raise a personal concern that's relevant to the permit. However, there were 9 requests that, in my view, met all of the requirements, 9 from the individuals, and specifically, I would grant the requests of Elizabeth Ann Frio, Suzanne Johnson, Patricia McCormick Mulvihill, Sandra Lee Thurman, Brittany Varner, Harold Wardlaw, Margaret Peggy McCormick Wardlaw, Shannon White Schubert, and Michael Schubert, and Hazel McCormick Williams. So colleagues, let me pause there and see how you came out on the parties. Commissioner Lindley.
I came out the same way on granting a hearing request for all those mentioned.
Likewise.
All right. I identified numerous issues that that were preserved by the Alliance or those individuals. And what I might do is just read those into a motion, and then we can discuss it on the other side and take any amendments if necessary. Colleagues, I'm going to include in the motion that we deny the request for reconsideration and that we allow 180 days for the hearing. All
I agree.
right. Colleagues, I move that we grant the hearing requests of the North San Gabriel Alliance, Elizabeth Ann Frio, Suzanne Johnson, Patricia McCormick Mulvihill, Sandra Lee Thurman, Brittany Varner, Harold Wardlaw, Margaret Peggy McCormick Wardlaw, Shannon White Schubert, and Michael Schubert, and Hazel McCormick Williams. I further move that we deny the remaining hearing requests and all requests for reconsideration. I further move that we refer this matter to SOA for a contested case hearing on the following issues. A, whether the draft permit, including the maximum allowable emission rates and chemical flexibility provisions, are protective of air quality in accordance with Texas Health and Safety Code Section 382.002. B, whether the draft permit, including the maximum allowable emission rates and chemical flexibility provisions, will be protective of the health of the requesters and their families, including sensitive subgroups, in accordance with Texas Health and Safety Code Sections 382.002 and 382.0518B2. Issue C, whether the draft permit, including the maximum allowable emission rates and chemical flexibility provisions, are protective of animals and vegetation in accordance with Texas Health and Safety Code Section 382.002. Issue D, whether the draft permit is protective of the use and enjoyment of the requester's property in accordance with 30 Texas Administrative Code Section 101.4. Issue E, whether the application contains sufficient and accurate information for TCEQ to develop a draft permit in accordance with Texas Health and Safety Code Section 382.0515 and Texas Administrative Code Section 116.114B1. Issue F, whether the permit application contains accurate and complete emissions estimates and air dispersion modeling. G, whether the draft permit requires adequate emission control technology, including applicable best available control technology in accordance with the Texas Health and Safety Code Section 382.0518B1. Issue H, whether the draft permit contains adequate monitoring and record-keeping requirements to demonstrate compliance with its terms. Issue I, whether the draft permit's hours of operation are protective of human health. And finally, issue J, whether the applicant's compliance history warrants additional terms or conditions in the draft permit or denial of the permit in accordance with the Texas Health and Safety Code Section 382.0518C and Chapter 60 of the Commission's rules. And finally, colleagues, I move that we specify that the maximum duration for the hearing is 180 days from the preliminary hearing to issuance of the proposal for decision. And I'm hoping that you may have landed in the same place on the issues, but we can take any discussion or friendly amendments now. Commissioner Lindley.
I don't have any. I could second it if,
Great.
Likewise, that captured all the issues I'd marked.
Okay.
and I will second your motion.
Because if the motion had to be made again, I was going to have one of you do it. So I'm glad we turned out this way.
Fair, yeah.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries. Ms. Smith, when you're ready, please call the next item.
Item number 5 is the consideration of material changes to contracts for goods and services awarded under Chapter 2155 of the Texas Government Code and executed between December 1st, 2021 and August 31st, 2022. The Executive Director's staff is here to present the item.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. For the record, my name is Roger Doobie, Purchasing Supervisor of Financial Administration Division. I have with me Chris Gobert, Procurement and Contracts Manager of the Financial Administration Division. We are here representing the Executive Director. This item contains the material changes made to the contracts and purchases for goods and services between December 1st, 2021 and August 31st, 2022. Reported material changes include extensions of the contract or completion of work for 6 months or more, or an increase in consideration of 10% or more. In accordance with the section 2155.088 of the Government Code, the Executive Director presents these items for your consideration. I am available for any questions.
Thank you. I have none. Colleagues, any questions?
No, thank you.
Ms. Smith, has anyone signed in to speak?
No.
Mr. Arthur?
OPIC supports adoption of the resolution.
Thank you. Colleagues, I do too. I'm ready to move forward with this.
I would move that we approve issuance of the Executive Director's proposed resolution that acknowledges the material changes to contracts for goods and services in accordance with Texas Government Code, Section 2155.088, as described in the TCEQ Interoffice Memorandum to the Commissioners and Executive Director dated December 14, 2022, and docket number 2022-1101-MIS.
I second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. Ms. Smith, when you're ready, please call the next item.
Item number 6 is consideration for approval to publish and solicit public comment on 4 total maximum daily loads for indicator bacteria in the Neches River tidal of the Neches River Basin. The Executive Director's staff is here to present this item.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. For the record, I am Karen Neiman with the Water Quality Planning Division in the Office of Water. With me today is Jason Leifester of the Total Maximum Daily Load Program and Arbery Puelka of the Environmental Law Division. Today, the Executive Director is requesting the release of public comment of 4 total maximum daily loads for indicator bacteria in Neches River tidal. The TMDLs cover an assessment unit in one segment within Jasper, Orange, and Jefferson counties. A stakeholder group was formed with balanced representation of all interested parties and was tasked with providing input on the TMDL document. The development of the document included an active public participation effort and balanced stakeholder group coordinated by TCEQ and the Texas Water Resources Institute. The success of the project is due to the collaborative effort of the individuals and organizations that put in the time to develop the document to improve water quality in their community. The Executive Director respectfully requests approval to publish the total maximum daily loads for public comment. Permission is also requested to make non-substantive and clerical corrections before providing the document for public notice. Thank you, and we're available to answer any questions you may have at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Neiman. I have none. Colleagues, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Smith, has anybody signed in to speak?
No one has signed in.
Mr. Arthur?
OPIC supports publication of these 4 draft TMDLs.
Thank you. And as always, we really appreciate the stakeholder input in this process. Colleagues, I'm ready to move forward, put this out for comment.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll make that motion. I think it bears repeating. Mr. Neiman said it's the strength of this rests on the input of the individuals and community stakeholders involved. So looking forward to the implementation plan on this space as well. I move that we approve the publication of and solicitation of public comments on 4 total maximum daily loads for indicator bacteria in Neches River tidal of the Neches River Basin as recommended by the Executive Director.
A second.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. Ms. Smith, when you're ready, please call the next items.
That brings us to our enforcement docket, items 7 through 55, and I'll just note that items 39 and 44 were previously remanded on motion of the Executive Director, and the Executive Director's staff is here to present these matters.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. For the record, my name is Melissa Cordell of the Enforcement Division, and with me today are Michael Parrish of the Enforcement Division and Gitanjali Yadav of the Litigation Division representing the Executive Director. Pending before you are items 7 through 38 and 40 through 43 and 45 through 55. The total assessed administrative penalties are $2,004,081, with $171,147 deferred, $790,662 applied toward supplemental environmental projects, and $1,042,312 to the general revenue. We respectfully request approval of these items and are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Cordell. I have none. Colleagues, any questions?
No questions.
Ms. Smith, has anybody signed in to speak?
No one has asked to address the commission, but on items 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 14, 16, 17, 19, 21, 23, and 26, we have people who have registered and are available to answer any questions if the commission has any.
Thank you. I appreciate their availability. I have none.
I agree.
All right, let's hear next from OPIC. Mr. Arthur.
OPIC supports adoption of these enforcement orders as presented by ED staff. I would like to note on item 33, the respondent, City of George West, is a repeat violator and unsatisfactory performer. But the penalties are consistent with the penalty policy and the corrective actions are substantial. So we do recommend approval.
Thank you, Mr. Arthur. I'm glad you brought that up. That particular item is pretty serious, and I would ask the Office of Compliance and Enforcement to keep close tabs on their progress and ensure that they come into compliance. Appreciate the comments. Colleagues, any questions or comments? All right, I believe we're ready for a motion.
I would move that we adopt items 7 through 38, 40 through 43, and 45 through 55 as recommended today by the Executive Director.
I second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. Ms. Smith, please call the next item.
Item 56 is the consideration of the monthly enforcement report, and Executive Director staff is here to present.
Good morning again.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. My name is Melissa Cordell of the Enforcement Division, and with me are Michael Parrish of the Enforcement Division and Gitanjali Yadav of the Litigation Division. We are here to present the monthly enforcement report for fiscal year 2023 through October. There were 131 effective administrative orders issued, and of those, 17 contain supplemental environmental projects. These orders assessed a total of $1,205,502 in penalties, with a payable amount of $759,820. $176,964 are to be paid towards supplemental environmental projects. 1,499 notices of violation have been issued through either our field offices or review of self-reported data in our central office, and 477 enforcement action referrals have been received. There are 2,274 pending administrative orders with 702 cases that are on the backlog. 191 cases are pending at the Attorney General's Office for representation in District Court. 2,157 cases are being tracked for compliance. We've included for review a summary of OCE investigative activities for fiscal years 2021, 22, and 23. We are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you again, Ms. Cordell. I have none. Colleagues, any questions?
No, thank you.
Likewise.
And again, Ms. Smith, has anybody signed in to speak?
No one's registered for this item.
Mr. Arthur.
OPIC appreciates the report and has no comments at this time.
Thank you. There's no action necessary on this item, so Ms. Smith, I'll ask you to please call the next item when you're ready.
Item number 57 is the consideration for publication of and hearing on proposed amendments to 30 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 285, regarding on-site sewage facilities. And the Executive Director's staff is here to present this item.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. On behalf of the Executive Director, I'm Donna Cosper with the Program Support and Environmental Assistance Division. With me is Harrison Cole Malley with the Environmental Law Division, and Melissa Keller with the Program Support and Environmental Assistance Division. The proposed rulemaking, which is in response to the petition filed by the Texas On-Site Wastewater Association in November 2020, would amend Chapter 285 to better protect public health and the environment by revising the existing rules for consistency with current industry terminology and standards. The proposed rules would also implement House Bill 1680, 87th Legislative Session, which allows certain leased portions of tracts of land owned by the federal government to be considered as separate tracts of land for the purposes of Chapter 285. A public hearing will be held on this proposal in Austin on January 30th, 2023, and staff respectfully recommends approval to propose the publication of and hearing on 30 TAC Chapter 285 on OSSFs. Staff also respectfully requests a permission to make non-substantive revisions to comply with Texas Register requirements. Thank you, and we're available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Cosper. I have none. Any questions, colleagues?
Thank you.
Seeing none. Ms. Smith, is anybody signed in to speak?
No one signed in.
And what say the Office of Public Interest Counsel?
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Executive Directors, Attorney, and staff. I'm Pranjal Mehta on behalf of OPIC. Our office has reviewed the proposed rulemaking. OPIC recognizes that this rulemaking would implement House Bill 1680, which allows leased portions of federal properties to be considered separately for the purposes of the implementation of 30 TSC Chapter 285. This rulemaking is also the result of the petitions with input from stakeholders through public meetings and written comments. OPIC agrees that the proposed rulemaking would amend Chapter 285 to better protect public health and the environment by revising the existing rules for consistency with industry terminology and standard. OPIC will attend the January 30th public hearing for this rule proposal and monitor any future comments or meetings in the process as it unfolds. At this time, OPIC supports publication. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mehta. Colleagues, any questions or comments?
No.
All right. As you heard, this rulemaking is largely in response to a petition for rulemaking as well as a piece of legislative implementation. I'd like to thank the Texas On-Site Wastewater Association for bringing this petition and helping improve the performance of their industry. They've been a very active stakeholder, and I have appreciated their leadership. I look forward to the input of all the stakeholders on this proposed rule, and I'm ready to move forward.
I would agree.
I likewise agree, and I would move that we approve the publication of and hearing on proposed revisions of 30 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 285, as recommended by the Executive Director.
A second.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries. Ms. Smith, when you're ready, please call the next item.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Item number 58 is the consideration of the adoption of proposed amendments to 30 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 113, Standards for Performance for Hazardous Air Pollutants and for Designated Facilities and Pollutants, Subchapter C, National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutions for Source Categories. The Executive Director's staff is here to present this item.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Public Interest Counsel. On behalf of the Executive Director, I am Melanie Nealon with the Air Permits Division. With me is Terry Salem with the Environmental Law Division. This adopted rulemaking amends 30 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 113, Standards of Performance for hazardous air pollutants and for designated facilities and pollutants, Subchapter C, National Emission Standards for Hazardous Air Pollutants for Source Categories, Federal Clean Air Act, Section 11240, Code of Federal Regulations, Part 63. The amendments will incorporate by reference revisions adopted by the United States Environmental Protection Agency to maximum achievable control technology and general available control technology standards. The incorporation by reference of these amended federal regulations into Chapter 113 will ensure consistency between federal and state requirements, allow the Commission to enforce the most current MAC and GAT standards prior to receiving formal delegation of the amended standards, facilitate delegation of the amended standards from the EPA, and allow TCEQ to maintain existing delegation. The proposed rules were published in the July 15th, 2022 issue of the Texas Register. A public hearing was held on August 11th, 2022, and the public comment period closed on August 15th, 2022. The rule team received one comment. No changes were made to the rulemaking in response to this comment. The only substantive changes since proposal were updating the incorporation dates of several standards to account for amendments EPA adopted after Chapter 113 proposal was drafted. In conclusion, staff respectfully recommends adoption of this rulemaking to Chapter 113, Subchapter C. Additionally, staff requests authorization to make non-substantive revisions necessary to comply with the Texas Register requirements. Thank you, and we are available to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Nealon. I have none. Colleagues, any questions?
No.
All right, Ms. Smith, is anybody signed in to speak?
No one is signed in.
And what say OPIC?
Good morning, Chairman, Commissioners, General Counsel, and Executive Director. My name is Eli Martinez, and I'm with the Office of Public Interest Counsel for the record. Our office reviewed this rulemaking and the proposed amended maximum achievable control technology and generally available control technology standards, as well as the updated work practice standards, compliance dates, record keeping, monitoring, reporting, and notification requirements. We concluded that the rulemaking serves the public interest by allowing the Commission to enforce the most current MACT and GACT standards prior to receiving formal delegation, and importantly, to maintain our existing delegation of those standards. We noted the comment made during the rulemaking efforts, and we agree on the disposition arrived at by the rule team. Although some revisions of Title V permits will need to take place, the overall preservation of Texas Title V operating permit program is paramount, and for these reasons, we support adoption.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez.
Available for any questions.
Colleagues, I think I don't have any concerns with these standards. I think it's important for enforcement of these standards to be delegated to Texas, so I am ready to move forward with adoption.
As am I, and I would move that we adopt the proposed amendments to 30 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 113, as recommended by the Executive Director.
I second the motion.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries. Ms. Smith, when you're ready, please call the next item.
Item 59 is our public comment session. We have one person signed in. The Commission will receive comments from the public on matters within the jurisdiction of the Commission in accordance with Texas Water Code, Section 5.112. Except be mindful that pending permit matters or other contested cases may not be discussed because they are the subject of a prohibition found in Texas Government Code Section 2001.061. In the interest of time, speakers will be limited to 3 minutes each, with the total time for public comment limited to 1 hour. Please note that the Commission's discussion of subjects for which public notice has not been given are limited to statements of specific factual response and recitation of existing policy. And first we have Mr. Stan Mitchell.
Good morning, Mr. Mitchell. It's good to see you again, sir. And go ahead whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Commissioners. I am Bexar County resident Stan Mitchell, delivering 6 documents. 1, regulatory capture, referenced at our November 2nd meeting, elicited no Commission response, so I'm delivering the complete Investopedia definition. 2, quote, fighting regulatory capture in the 21st century, unquote. To Senator Mike Lee, regulatory capture, quote, is one of the most pressing political, economic, and moral issues of our time, unquote. Further, it violates two core principles of the U.S. Constitution cited at page 3. The Environmental Integrity Project is a 20-year-old nonprofit whose former EPA enforcement attorneys advocate for effective enforcement of environmental laws. EIP reports are accessible with a web search on their documents' titles. You would pursue the identified threats if you were freed from the inertia of regulatory capture. If you're faithful to your motto, quote, protecting Texas by reducing and preventing pollution, unquote. 3 and 4. The EIP lawsuit against the EPA includes, quote, the TCEQ's request was drafted by lobbyists during a series of closed-door meetings with TCEQ in 2010, unquote. This flagrant violation of the public trust by TCEQ demands your review of recent TCEQ rulings against private interests in general, and the Vista Ridge Pipeline and Dr. Curtis Chubb petition in particular, providing for evidence of contamination at 265 power plants described in the pervasive non-compliance that continues to prevent environmental restoration. 5, the EIP reports about 200 national sites with, quote, coal ash ponds closing or closed in groundwater or dangerously close to groundwater, unquote, concluding Sandow has unsafe levels of chromium and lithium. Its background wells also appear to be contaminated, making it much harder to know whether the unit covered by the coal ash rule is leaking. 6, in November, the Texas Sunset Advisory Commission objected to the fruits of regulatory capture, but did not use that term. The Lieutenant Governor and House Speaker who appointed the commission and Chair Schwertner are copied here, so regulatory capture's effects can be added to other advisory group criticism of the TCEQ. As Carrizo-Simsboro aquifers quantity and quality deteriorate at an accelerating rate, and the TCEQ, quote, acts in ways that benefit the interests it is supposed to be regulating, unquote, pressure on the TCEQ for regulatory reform increases. The TCEQ must focus on its law enforcement duties or be overtaken by superior legal authorities. Thank you for your attention.
That's 3 minutes.
Mr. Mitchell, thank you. You had impeccable timing. You came in right at 3 minutes. I appreciate that, sir.
Practiced.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Good to see you again. Ms. Smith, when you're ready, please call the next items.
The commission will meet in closed session in room 211S at, I'm going to say 11:28. Right now?
Yes.
Yep. As permitted by the Open Meetings Act, including Texas Government Code Sections 551.071 and 551.074, to take up and consider the matters pursuant to items numbers 60 through 63 as posted and noticed.
The time is 11:27 a.m. and we are in recess.
What are the opacity or emission limits for white smoke above the agency?
Please. The time is 12:11 p.m. We're back in public session, having just met in executive session.
The commission met in room 211S of Building E for closed session from 11:29 until 12:10 p.m. on item number 61, 62, and 63 as posted in notice pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551.074. And I believe that we're ready to take a vote on item 61.
And colleagues, I'll have a motion here in just a moment. Here we go. Colleagues, I am very pleased to move for the appointment of Erin Chancellor as interim executive director beginning December 15, 2022, and to adjust her pay so that it is commensurate with the executive director's salary during her tenure as interim executive director.
I second.
The motion has been made and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. Congratulations, Erin. I'm also very pleased to announce that Brent Wade has graciously agreed to serve as Deputy Executive Director to Erin. And so, Brent, thank you for that. We're delighted to have you in the executive suite and then in that role. Thanks so much. Colleagues, any other comments?
Best of luck.
It's going to be great. It'll be great.
Just to wrap up on 62 and 63, no action was taken during executive session.
All right. Anything else?
No, sir.
All right. Colleagues, the time is 12:13 p.m. and we are adjourned.